Okay, it says we're live.
Fine.
I'm not certain if that's true, but let's hope. Good morning, all 4 people, 5 people if we count Ellie, I guess, who may be watching. And my husband, apparently. Um, so, good morning and welcome to this trial run on the Creative Contessa live stream. It's nice to see that the black circles under my eyes are looking lovely and black this morning. So, first question actually was, how is it over in Korea? And the answer is that it would be better if we weren't restricted to post. So, Brian's actually been on restriction of movement for 2 weeks, which means he's not been allowed to leave base. And so we haven't been able to do very much. It's been great. So we started off pretty strong, taking a nice, going up for hikes. And this is a 4-day weekend technically. So it's especially nice to be restricted to an American military post because we were supposed to be going to Jeju Island this morning, which if you don't know Jeju Island, you should look it up. It's an amazing volcanic island south of the mainland of Korea. And it's this massive, basically just one volcano and this beautiful tropical island. And it's a really gorgeous place to visit. Blue water, amazing geologic formations. And that's where we were going to be today. We should have been hiking to the top of Halasan, that massive volcano. So we're not. Instead, we're here. And I guess if I'm lucky, we'll get to go take another walk around post like we do every day. Yeah. So otherwise, really excited to be back in Korea, and hopefully someday we'll get to actually see more of Korea than Camp Casey. Yeah. So is this supposed to be a Q&A? Oh, Ryan suggested I should briefly whine about four-wheeled luggages and luggage handlers at airports, because see this suitcase? Yeah. So you see those black scrapes? That's tarmac and wheel marks from where this brand new suitcase was run over. We found out once we unpacked it here in Korea, run over, and the metal strutting on the inside is actually bent. This is how hard they ran over this thing with a vehicle, right? See this really strong metal strutting, how bent it is? Yeah, I bought this in late November in Bologna in Italy. It's a brand new suitcase, and it fell off the luggage rack, I'm betting, and they ran it over, and no one decided to tell me that they had run it over. I had to find out when I unpacked it. So my travel tip for you this morning is, yeah, seriously, right? There's no way this metal strutting was bent because another suitcase ran into it. This is a serious piece of metal here. They ran it over and decided that they were just going to pretend it didn't happen. So I'm going to be reaching out to Delta and telling them that they owe me a new suitcase. But my recommendation is that you should always try to unpack your suitcases sooner than later so you can get to them about the damage that they will invariably have caused your luggage. But the thing I really want to warn you away from are these stupid four-wheeled luggage suitcases. Right, they're useless for actually dragging over any real surfaces. And remember, I said I just bought this at the end of November, and I've used it twice, basically. This wheel is already almost completely gone and worn away. Because, of course, when I go places like walk, I actually tilt it to drag it, because moving it along like this literally strains your entire arm and torso really heavily. And even though these suitcases are supposed to do that, they aren't designed for that. So the wheels will literally wear away. So stay away from these four-wheeled suitcases if you actually want to, I don't know, drag your bags anywhere at any kind of speed. Now, granted, if you have a personal servant who can port your baggage for you, then who cares? They can put it on their shoulders and carry it for you, obviously, when the wheel wears out. In fact, when we were in Amsterdam in October, we had a wheel literally wear out, dragging it from the train station to the hotel mid-drag, 1 kilometer into a 2-kilometer walk. So we had to drag that bag on no wheels for a kilometer at midnight, passing a whole bunch of people who were super high on pot. So that was fun.
Yeah, that was exciting.
That was very exciting.
And not the first time it's happened.
Yeah, not the first time I've lost wheels that way. So yeah, my recommendation on baggage for travel, 2 wheels, and make sure that those wheels are like super high quality inline skate wheels. Those are the best. They have strong bearings, they're high resistant. And of course, these are designed so that you can't replace those wheels. You can't. You literally have to tear the entire plastic casing apart. So you just have to buy a new suitcase. Built-in obsolescence for the win. Okay, well, any other questions? It's weird that
Classic bad chuckers.
claims we only have 1 person watching, and yet at least 2 people are commenting. Oh, the plate. Yeah, I don't know, is it possible to post pictures in the chat? If it is, go ahead and post that picture in the chat. Yeah, so that plate, I wonder if I can, look for my phone. That plate that you sent me, yeah, the pewter plate. So first thing, does it have an angel on the back? Like in the back in the center? Otherwise, the first thing you want to do is test it for lead, because pewter has traditionally been made with tin and lead. In more modern pieces are not, of course, anymore, but there are swipe kits that you can purchase at pretty much any like home improvement store, and you just, you swipe the piece in question, and it will change into a specific color if it has lead. But that plate actually would not be bad, would actually be pretty good for a serving plate from the 15th or 16th century. So yeah, actually that's a pretty darned good find. Let me see if I can show people the picture. Okay, this is the plate that my dear friend Kate found. It's brass because it looks like it's pewter, but if it's brass, then that's of course a different thing altogether. In terms of lead content, it shouldn't have lead. I guess if I actually turn my brightness up down from the minimal nighttime brightness, then it looks more brass. Yeah. Yes, but in terms of shape, you actually do see serving platters that look exactly like that. So it's a good find if you can find more platters like this. For those of you who are into the medieval living history stuff and are looking for less expensive options that can pass as late medieval in this case, those kind of plates were really common in the early 20th century, I think. There was various times the Middle Ages have come back and various people have recreated items kind of loosely inspired by the medieval period and its aesthetic. And so if you shop correctly at secondhand stores, then you can definitely find items like that. So that's a pretty good find. I would get that. Then honestly, I would get that, and I would use that just normally in my modern life for plating up food in an attractive fashion. But that's just me. I'm not normal. We all know that. I'm not in the center of the bell curve. I'm always somewhere off to the far right. Other questions this morning? Someone asked me about how I managed to do all of the travel that I do without, someone actually asked if I was a trust fund baby, which I find that's very amusing. No, I'm definitely not a trust fund baby. I managed to travel as often as I do, and in business or first class, because I leverage points. My husband just pointed at himself and said, because of me. That is not true, sir.
I'm supposed to I can hear that.
So the travel thing is I travel in points, right? We use credit cards to pay for every single purchase, and we treat those credit cards like debit cards. And I'm going to be putting out a brief video on my travel channel, actually Travels with the Contessa, on how easy it is to actually not pay for your travel if you play the game right. So stay tuned for that. subscribe to the Travels with the Contessa if you're interested in travel-specific content. So next question, what are things to look for when it comes to wooden trenchers, plates, etc.? Very good question. So simple and plain for wooden trenchers, and we have examples of round ones. But that's, round ones from going pretty far back, actually, and square ones. So you want in fact, you want very basic geometric shapes, nothing exciting. So here is actually an example of a modern German breadboard, because they're still using these in Germany. And they're literally, because German loaves of bread are traditionally round, because, bread has actually been traditionally round for thousands of years. As you can see, if you check out that loaf of bread, the loaves of bread that they have found in Pompeii that are preserved, sort of preserved. So plain round is a really good option for wooden trencher. This is actually a reproduction of a kind of trencher that you see cropping up in the late 15th, early 16th century in England. They found some of these on the Mary Rose, wreck of the Mary Rose, which went down in the 1540s, we found out. But it was built in 1508, but it sank in the 1540s. So what you actually see here is it has these two depressions. And this, of course, will help keep your sauce from running off your plate. And this is actually for salt. So salt would actually be placed in this little cellar, and then you just take the salt out and you sprinkle it on your food. So these are the shapes you want to look for when you're looking for wood. Obviously this is a very easy shape to create using simple medieval tools, and this is a slightly less easy, but still relatively easy shape to make if you have, someone with a lathe, for instance. Rectangular, I haven't seen rectangular wooden ones so much. Rectangular metal ones, lots of rectangular metal ones, and I don't know why. I haven't really found. Now, I'd like to preface this with, I have not personally seen rectangular wooden trenchers in medieval and depictions of medieval people eating. That doesn't mean it didn't exist. There's new evidence coming out all the time of new visual evidence coming out of people's private libraries. Here's an example of a reproduction metal trencher. And you see it has the edges to keep the sauces in. And this is pewter, lead-free pewter. And yeah, this also, you might see the now that has some topography to it. This is because of those luggage gorillas tossing bags around. Yeah, this now has strange bends in it from being hauled across the oceans. Yeah, fun.
Allows you to keep your sauces.
Yeah. So I haven't personally seen evidence of rectangular wooden trenchers. Doesn't mean it didn't exist. And probably there's some people out there maybe in a very specific period who have their eye on a very specific geography and time, and they have evidence of rectangular wooden trenchers. I don't have that evidence though. Lots of rectangular metal trenchers though. And I honestly don't know why I haven't seen such evidence of that. It's honestly, here's the reality. Medieval eating was such a different, they dined in a very different way. We're used to, plating up our food on a plate and eating it that way. And it seems that they ate what?
Ellie.
Oh, oh, Ellie says, "Wah, blah, ker, blah, do, blah." Yeah, that's she's very articulate. So people just ate differently. Food was served in these was brought to a table in a big platter, and then you were served a thing from that platter, and you ate that thing. And then the next dish was brought and served from the platter, and you ate that thing. They didn't, it seems that the method of eating, at least in terms of festival eating, so feasts, wasn't our idea of we're going to plate a whole bunch of things up on this plate. It was eat one thing at a time, enjoy it, and move on. So for that's why those little metal trenchers, they don't have to be very big, because you're not plating up mass amounts of food. You're just putting one thing on it and eating that thing. And then, of course, the lower classes tended to eat a whole lot of pottages. And by lower classes, I mean, like peasants. Their everyday food was a pottage. And if you don't know what a pottage is, it's basically a stew of whatever you have on hand. So pottage can change every day based on what's in season. Favorite camping hacks for medieval events. Oh, okay. So if you have, especially if you have a modern tent, my favorite hack for survival in any place, especially where the sun hits your tent, is to cover your tent in fabric of some kind. And this has the double effect of maybe it makes your modern tent look less modern, so you can maybe medievalize it with some fabric, but more practically, that fabric will keep the sun from penetrating your tent and turning it into an easy bake oven. And that is very important for those of us who like to sleep past dawn. It will also actually help insulate your tent at night. So it will keep it warmer at night and cooler in the day. So that's my hack, my favorite hack for if you have a modern tent, which of course I did for the first 5 or 6 years of my medievalist life. I was a student and couldn't afford an actual canvas pavilion. And on the inside of your pavilion, if you do have a canvas pavilion, I like putting wall hangings on the inside of my pavilion because it has the same effect of insulating it against the heating effects of the sun or the cooling effects of night. So those are really good, using even if it's just, it doesn't, I mean, yes, I've got all these nice tapestries now, but I didn't always have all these nice tapestries. So fabric, just lengths of fabric from the discount bin at the local fabric store, good option. If you're really lucky, the upholstery remnant sections might sometimes have medieval looking upholstery. In fact, I found out that some upholstery fabric I bought for $1 a yard 20 years ago is in fact a reproduction of fabric that is in the V&A's collection. So someday I'll get my stuff back out of storage and I'll be able to use that properly. And shaking his head at me. We're never getting our things back, apparently. And I'll actually be able to hang that and medievalize a specific room in my house because I did buy 12 yards of it, enough to cover at least a wall. And I just thought it looked medieval because it had these great inverted fleur-de-lis patterns. But apparently, once I was randomly, I occasionally go and dig through the Victoria and Albert's online textile collection, as one does, and found that pattern there. I was shocked, actually. So my tip on, getting fabric to decorate your camp, hit the remnant section of fabric stores, especially if you can get to big cities like Philadelphia, Louisiana, probably, or New Orleans probably has a fabric district, that sort of thing. Other favorite camping hacks, preparing food in advance, freezing it, and especially hand pies. So, meat pies, egg pies, veggie pies that are completely contained in a very sturdy crust. And you make them in advance and you freeze them, and then they just sort of live in your cooler and you eat your way down. The things that defrost on top, you put the things that you want to start eating on top, and you just kind of eat your way down to the bottom. Hand pies, man, the best way to survive an event like Penzic, especially when you're doing a lot. And I'm always teaching hours and hours a day, so I don't have time to sit down and eat food. So being able to grab a pie, shove it down your gullet, and keep going is highly valuable for camping hacks. Also, drink lots of water. If you are at any medieval camping event, your body will lie to you. You're so excited, you're having so much fun that you don't think you need to drink water. You think you've had enough, but you probably haven't. And you'll find out whether you haven't later on when you go to powder your nose. Your body will tell you. It will be honest. Okay. If you have any more specific camping hack questions, let me know. I'll try to think some more about that. But let's go on to the next question. What lessons have I learned from historical cooking that I now use in everyday cooking? So it's actually interesting. Especially the more I've explored other cuisines rather than modern European or modern Western cuisine, I've discovered that a lot of more cuisines in other places are actually still using medieval techniques as their foundational flavors. for instance, a lot of medieval recipes call for you to scald the meat before you do something else with it. Like literally, they tell you to plunge it in boiling water and poach it. And a lot of Chinese dishes actually require you to do that to meat, even to this day. In fact, I'm going to be putting out a video on making dong po pork. And the first thing you have to do to your pork belly is plunge it in scalding water and let it cook for 10 minutes. It's not going to, by no means does that cook it through at all, because it's a big, thick pork belly. But it almost seems like they had an idea about, even if they didn't understand necessarily about microbiota and the dangers, it seems that they understood that scalding your meat led to better outcomes of eating the meat. And I think it might be that they observed that maybe fewer people got sick if you did that to your meat. But other things from historical cooking that I've learned that I apply in my modern cooking. How to accomplish things without appliances. Because medieval, historic cuisine, pre-industrial era, you still have a lot of the same kinds of dishes that require onions to be chopped and meat to be ground or shredded into tiny pieces. And you still need to whip egg whites up, but they didn't even have whisks like we understand a whisk. So it actually has taught me to be a lot more resourceful when I end up in a kitchen that doesn't have all the equipment that my kitchen normally has. For instance, right now, actually, we're in my husband's senior living quarters on a military base in Korea. And so this means that my things haven't arrived. My kitchen things have not yet arrived. And actually a lot of them have gone into storage or going to my residence in Washington. So I've, had to be very medieval in how I prepare my food, much more, taking what it is I have and just using it.
Much more knife work.
Yeah, now I'm hungry. I'm much more knife work, a lot more knife work. For instance, I don't have a grater right now. I don't have even a grater. And the only graters I can find are terrible plastic ones. And so to shred cheese, I'm having to use a knife to shred my cheese. I'm learning how to knife shred cheese. So yeah. So I would say that less in terms of medieval historical cooking hasn't taught me so much. A lot of the techniques are the same, but I sort of knew them already from modern cooking. But the ingenuity of how to process food without processing equipment, that definitely historic cooking has taught me how to be much more resourceful in the kitchen, I will say. Yeah, that's a good question, actually. So disguising Brunolfer, did that answer your question, or did you have another question related to cooking? I'll give him a moment to think that. And disguising, going back to the medieval camping hacks, disguising modern things. Yeah, fabric is really your friend for disguising all of the big things, the furniture, your bed, the outside of your tent, the inside of your tent. I cannot stress enough the wonder that some relatively inexpensive fabric from the bargain bin can create in an encampment. It can turn your encampment from NASCAR chic into medieval-esque glory, I will say. Other questions for this morning? We've actually been getting some snow here, which is nice because usually it's too dry for snow. It's too cold in Korea up here near the border. But we've actually been getting some snow, and I will say that the place where we are right now, the military base, is located in a really pretty part of the country north of Seoul. We're actually in the mountains, so there's beautiful big hills on post right here, and there's actually I'll take some video of it later. There's actually a Korean cemetery here, a traditional one on post that was obviously here before the base was. And for those who haven't actually seen traditional Korean cemeteries, the traditional burial method is still to bury people under mounds of earth, like the ancient Celts did, sort of like the Egyptians did with their more pointy mounds. And there's still those who can afford it still do that. It's very expensive though to have your own private miniature hill grave. But there's something very haunting about hill graves in a, I don't know, maybe more beautifully haunting instead of creepily haunting than a cemetery filled with stones that look like chess pieces. Instead, you have all these mounds that just feels much more visceral, I feel like. Oh, snowstorms in the southern US. Yeah, man. Weather patterns these days. I'm from Delaware. For those who don't know, I am an actual Delawarean. For many of you, I may be the only Delawarean you will ever meet. But my last week, my father sent me a picture. There was a foot of snow and it was still snowing. And the day before, the temperatures had been in the 60s. And the next day, the temperatures were in the 60s again. But in that 72-hour period, they went from 60s to foot of snow to 60s. So there's some crazy, crazy weather happening in certain parts of the world. I kind of like a foot of snow, actually. That would be really nice. I love snow. I love snow walking. I just keep seeing all these pictures of people in their snow medieval clothes or their snow historical clothes. And it's just, there's not enough snow here for that. Although the streams are frozen, and we were actually thinking of going out and testing the pianella on frozen ice and seeing how that goes. I kind of imagine that I'm going to end up falling through the ice, but you'll see soon. Oh, God, so this is our third time in Korea, for those who don't know. So we've actually lived here previously for a total of 4 years. And the beautiful thing about Korea is that it's now a wealthy country and they can afford to rebuild all of those historic sites. I guess I should actually read that question. So the question is, what period things about Korea am I planning to explore? So Korea can afford to rebuild historic sites that had been destroyed by the Japanese during the Japanese occupation and then by the Korean War, which leveled the peninsula from the Chinese border to Busan, basically. So they're now these gorgeous, amazing Shilla era. So that's the first millennia. Goryeo, which is like our Middle Ages, and then Choson, which is like Ming Dynasty to Qing Dynasty sort of era, up until the 1900s, basically. They've rebuilt the palaces and temples and villages. And so you can now go and literally step back in time in specific parts of Korea. So we'll be going to, there's 4 or 5 palaces in Seoul, actually, and you can go watch the changing of the guards in traditional Choson style. So that, wear all the traditional uniforms and they have all the drums and the instruments. And they sometimes actually have dancers come out and do traditional Korean dance, which I also do, actually. These big feather fans. So we're going to be going, that's in Seoul, are those palaces. And then Gyeongju was the capital of the Shilla Empire. So that's the first millennium down in the south of the peninsula. And Gyeongju is actually where they have pyramid-sized hill graves. So there's going to be lots of meandering about these historic sites and the villages. And yet the villages, these traditional villages, you can go and do traditional Korean crafts, handcrafts. And one of them, you can actually go and take this massive hammer and beat the hell out of some rice dough that they're turning into rice cakes for rice cake ice cream sundaes. And yeah, we'll definitely be getting a lot of footage of that when we can leave the base and go out and see it. Yeah, and I'll be wearing my traditional Korean clothes, my hanbok and my chogori and all of that. And we'll be exploring as many of the historical sites as we can. Thankfully, we know the lay of the land, so we basically know exactly where we have to go. So what is a good source of imagery that one can peruse to help develop their eye to what is medievalesque for things like candlesticks and servingware? So what you want to look for actually are medieval imagery of the especially famous historical and or legendary or biblical feasts, because that's where you're going to see people feasting. And so you'll see things like candlesticks and servingware. So you want to look for the Last Supper. You want to look for the Feast at Cana. You want to look for feasts like Alexander. There was whole all the legendary stories of Alexander the Great were very popular. So if you look up, Alexander the Great medieval manuscript, you're probably going to get a lot of imagery of people feasting. And so, yeah, you're going to be able to then look at the table and see the table layout, and you'll see what the servers are carrying, how they're carrying it, what they're wearing while they carry it. And you're going to start noticing, especially in Italy, that they always have this towel draped over their shoulder. So you want to look up, if you're doing a search, especially if you're doing a Google search, you want to look up, medieval Last Supper, medieval Alexander the Great, medieval Feast of Cana. You look up if any kind of historical, or Salome is another one where you're going to see people feasting, because the whole tale of John the Baptist, how she supposedly danced to seduce, lovely misogynist tale, how she supposedly at her mother's behest danced to seduce Herod and convince him to behead John the Baptist. And so any dance of Salome medieval, you're going to see the table laid out. The clothing, you're not going to be able to take as being understood as actual medieval clothing. That's going to be what medieval people thought was legendary, allegorical, fantastical clothing. So those are costumes as the medieval person thought. But the table layouts are just what because they didn't really get that creative in their table layouts. The table layouts are going to be line up pretty hard, pretty one-to-one with the descriptions we have from books of etiquette. That's another place, actually, if you're interested in medieval dining practices, especially higher upper class. There's a whole series of medieval books of etiquette that, God bless the Victorians, that the Victorians actually transcribed and published back in the late 19th century. Baby's book is one of them, and a book of nurture. They're all called the Book of Nurture, and there's a cheap copy available on Abe Books and on Barnes and Noble. But yeah, if you look up Book of Nurture, you can get the written description of how things are served in etiquette. And then for the visual, you want to be looking at manuscripts and paintings, frescoes especially, of the Last Supper, the Feast of Cana, Salome, and the exploits of Alexander the Great always shows. And with Alexander the Great, you're always going to get a peacock being served. So that's always fun. Yeah. And the table layouts, it's really interesting, even though obviously Europe was a very diverse place in the Middle Ages. The table layouts don't really seem to diverge that much from region to region. I've spent a lot of time in the last several months staring at a lot of imagery of feast tables. And it all seems to, you're going to start seeing some really, you're going to see repeating motifs and layouts. It's not going to be, there's not like a continental style of laying out the table and an English style and a Russian style and a French style, kind of like there is now in modern formal table settings. They also had far fewer implements to worry about. So it was actually a much simpler process. The complexity of medieval feasts actually is not so much the table layout, but the ritual that was involved, especially in serving high table. The eating a medieval feast was understood to be kind of a representation of the Last Supper, right? It was a model. It was modeled on that, and so there was a very spiritual, religious ritualistic aspect to it, and that there was actually, especially in the Duchy of Burgundy, the server would actually kiss the towel and bow before the Duke, and say a prayer actually over the food. So the service is where there's a lot of complexity, much less than the layout of the table. Yeah, simple, unlike at Downton Abbey. Yes. For those who don't know, the Contessa's finally watching Downton Abbey. That's right. I avoided it oppositionally defiantly for years because it's what everyone was doing. And as we all know, I don't do what everyone is doing. But now that it's fallen off of people's radars, I'm watching it. It's a great, I have really been appreciating it. And I've been very inspired by the pre-World War II clothes at any rate. I'm not such a big fan of the 20s clothing. As a gay costumer friend of mine once said, he said, yeah, that was a bunch of gay men designing dresses for penisless boys. That's actually what he said. Referring to 1920s clothing. But I do love the pre-World War I clothing. That's just great, great stuff, and very practical even for everyday wear. So you're probably going to see some project videos on me making some Titanic era clothing coming up here shortly, eventually. Yeah. Other questions? When I post this video, I might edit out the part about penisless boys. We'll see. In any case, that will get this video banned in Korea. So, or you'll have to confirm that you are in fact 19 or older to be able to watch it. Oh, my husband's asleep on the couch. So upcoming adventures. Hypothetically, I'm going back to Italy at the beginning of February. Hypothetically, going back to Florence. We'll see if that ends up happening. And hypothetically, I'll be spending 2 weeks there, continuing my Italian studies. And hypothetically, I'll be proceeding up to Southampton to meet my husband, and we will be heading off on a 2-week Canary Island, Portugal cruise on the Queen Elizabeth. So that would that's going to be some really good travel content and a really good time. I love cruising because someone else is taking care of my every need, and all I have to do is worry about what food I'm actually going to eat from the menu and what thing we're going to do in port that day. And my most stressful decision is which evening gown I'm going to wear. So I'm very excited about having a vacation, an actual vacation where I don't have to think about a thing. Actually, that'll be really, really nice. But I think it will also, the weather will be nice. Hopefully no winter Atlantic storms crossing the Bay of Biscay. Oof. I was once on a cruise where it felt like we were in a fun house because the stairs would vanish beneath your feet and then come back way too soon. That was exciting. River cruises. Oh, goodness. Yeah, so if there's a lot of interesting Asian river cruises now. The Nile cruise. I've always wanted to do a Nile cruise because if you cruise on the Nile, then, you actually have better access to a lot of the sites that are upriver on the Nile. And it just feels like such an elegant 20s, 30s sort of way to explore Egypt, like your Agatha Christie or Hercule Poirot. So I've always wanted to do a Nile cruise, and they've got some really nice vintage steamships that are still decorated a la 1920s and 30s. In Europe, of course, the most famous river cruise is the Rhine River cruise, followed by the Danube. The Rhine River, even though there's a reason it's cliche, because the villages on the Rhine are in fact extremely picturesque, very pedestrianized, and the views, of course, are stunning. So, yes, it's very cliche, but a Rhine River cruise is a really great cruise. But lesser known are the Main River cruises, actually. I might recommend a Main River cruise over Rhine River because A, the Main River is less known, and B, it goes through Bavaria, and it goes through some amazing, amazing, beautiful medieval cities that are much less touristed than the Rhine River cities. For instance, Miltenberg am Main, which is the city where I used to host all of the medieval dance events that I used to run when I was still living there. That is this glorious medieval mercantile city that thankfully became very poor as of the 16th century, which meant that they couldn't afford to update to the hideous Baroque and neoclassical style. So it's still all this gorgeous half timber, and the city now, they've of course renovated it. It's beautifully painted and all of the good things. So you would get to stop in cities like Miltenberg or Rothenburg, Obtertauber, or Würzburg, which is also amazing and has at Würzburg you have the Archiepiscopal Palace, the Versailles of Germany, and it's very much like Versailles. And in fact, it's in better shape than Versailles because there was no revolution that destroyed it like there was in France. So yeah, I might recommend a Main River cruise, in fact. Yeah. Let's see. When is the creative Contessa doing a Jornea workshop? That's a good question. I should probably schedule one of those. I need to schedule a coif workshop for my cute little, oh, my stuff fetcher has fallen asleep. I can't believe it. He just did 24-hour duty. I guess it's okay if he fell asleep now. I'm going to do a workshop for the coif, and I will do a Jornea workshop. I will probably look into scheduling that for later March. Yeah. Okay, that's it. I'm committing. We're doing a Jornea workshop second half of March. Yes, like back end, like after Gulf Wars and all of that. It might get moved up if my cruise gets canceled. Yeah, for those who don't know, the Jornea is that overgarment. It's very typical. Some people call it a tabard, but it's not. Overgarment that men and women wore in the 15th century in Italy. And beloved, go fetch my Jornea. Go fetch my Jornea. Kate, my dear, were you talking about for men or for women? Thinking about river cruises while my husband fetches the Jornea. There's a lot of Eastern river cruises now too, Eastern Europe river cruises. The Volga, there's a Volga river cruise, which would also be very interesting. Yeah. And then yours as well. Yay. He remembered what a Jornea is. Okay, so for those who don't know, this is the ladies' Jornea. I can't really get back from the screen. But you wear it over a dress like this one, actually. And it's open on the sides. At least this one is, right? And this one has a train it drags on the ground. So that's the ladies. And this is actual cloth of gold, but not gold. It's some other metal. But I actually found this in the remnants bin at a German factory outlet, fabric factory outlet. And then this is the men's Jornea. It's significantly shorter. And lighter. Yeah, mine. The cloth of gold Jornea weighs a lot. I call that my weight loss Jornea. Anyway, so this is the men's. And this is the unstructured one. There's plenty of evidence for ones that are actually where the pleats are structured with tapes on the inside, possibly with little pin pleats to hold the pleats in place and give them that nice big full fold. But this is the unstructured Jornea, which was also worn especially towards the 1470s and 1480s. Oh yeah, there is a video for the men's one, 7-minute video that talks about the structure and the wearing of it too. It's actually, the video is called "When Men's Clothing Had Class" in the 1470s. Yeah. Ah, great. Oh wow, that's really funny. So Harrison, the YouTube algorithm actually hid your question and let me review it first because maybe it might have had scandalous material in it. Yeah. So Garrison says, how low would a typical men's Jornea go down? To the knee? ? Yeah. So at least to the knee, and then as the century wears on, they get shorter and shorter. Typical for Italian, for the Italian style seems to be, definitely about to the knee. And that's because they're open on the side, so you can see all the salacious bits that way. But there are examples of Jornea that are actually like mid-thigh. And then, of course, in Burgundy, the fashion was for the overgarment to basically not even cover your buttocks entirely amongst the youth. The preachers, you see it in the manuscripts, and of course we have confirmation that that's not just artistic license, because thankfully preachers preached, they railed against the shortness of those garments and how you could just see men's private bits. You couldn't, but they claimed that you could intimate they were there because then you could see the hosen. But in Italy, typical Jornea length for men is knee length. And that's possibly in part because the Jornea was also as with many things in Italian fashion, was also the overgarment for, was the surcoat. It was the decorative overgarment that a lot of condottiere wore. And so you wanted it to be long enough to, drape dramatically over your saddle. So probably that might be why they were longer in Italy than they were in France and Burgundy. It could just be also that the Franco-Burgundians were more dissolute. I mean, that's a possibility. Mostly interested in men's fashion for Prince Pedro, right? So I will probably be doing a men's Jornea workshop and a ladies' Jornea workshop, and I will do those separately so that people who want both can do both, or who don't want both can just do one or the other. The other interesting thing about the Jornea is the flexibility in its use and its wearing. Especially for less for ladies, they didn't have as many options, but for the men, fortunately my thing bringer has, I think, gone to bed. For the men, you could wear it. We have visual evidence of them wearing it just like this, right? So open, no belting. Or they could belt it just in the front and have the back flowing, dramatically. Or there's evidence of belting it all the way around, front and back. What's the interesting thing about if you leave it unbelted in the back, there's actually a tidbit in one of the dance manuscripts from this era that talks about how men should dance in this garment. And it specifically says that you can grab both sides, and when you turn, you hold it out and it will flare out nicely. It's always fun when all those little bits connect, when you have visual records and written records and, basically confirming each other's existence and telling you how to wear things, like how to use these garments when you move in them. The other show. Yeah. Okay, other questions? We could easily ask you a million questions. Well, then ask them, damn it. I see our phones are all on and making noise. That's excellent. I'll try to remember that for the next live Q&A. So if you're not familiar with Korean history so much, they didn't, Asia, with the exception of Japan, which is like the exception for everything, Asia didn't have a medieval period the way Europe did, and of course the term medieval is coined by us, the Victorians, basically, who wanted to look back on the era before them and claim that it was much less sophisticated than they were, which is patently not true. In fact, just it was differently sophisticated. But so Korean history is broken down into different eras. And so, you have, I mentioned the Shilla Empire, that's the first millennium, basically, and that eventually the kingdom of Shilla encompassed the whole peninsula. And they have some very interesting clothes. And I'm going to be actually making an ensemble from that era because they're just really beautiful and I think appealing also visually. And then sort of in what is the European Middle Ages is the Goryeo era, like the 1100s to the end of the 1400s. And then you have the Choson, which covers the 15th century all the way through to 1900, basically. And most of what you will see in Korea in terms of architecture and art is going to be from the Choson era. There is, however, a lot of pottery from Goryeo, so more medieval, call it, and a lot of clothing is from the Choson era. So the modern hanbok, what a lot of people think of when they think of festive Korean clothing, that's very Choson, so that's 19th century, very much not medieval, which is why when I see all these people in medieval organizations wandering around in Choson clothing, I'm like, no, sadly, that is not medieval Korean clothing. In fact, the clothing Korean clothing from the 14th through 16th centuries is really unappealing. It's very, very baggy. The coats are literally ginormous, like they hang from the shoulders, and the sleeves are massive, and the skirt is just this big A skirt that's more or less hidden down to the hips by this giant coat. And it's been explained to me. I asked why would women wear shapeless, unappealing clothing like that? And someone commented, well, it's conspicuous consumption because you waste a lot of fabric that way. And I'm like, okay, I guess, but Europeans managed to conspicuously consume fabric by just dragging it on the ground and still making it fit their bodies in some kind of way. So I'm not quite certain if it's just a reaction. The earlier things were more fitted, and of course we want to rebel against whatever was the past. So it was fitted before, so now it's going to be really unfitted. And then the next movement, of course, is what was unfitted before, so now it's going to be really nice and fitted. But that's why I will probably not be making 15th century Korean clothing, because I find it so very unappealing visually for women anyway. Men is a completely different thing. But Sheila era clothing for women is absolutely lovely. I wonder if I can share my screen to figure that out for next time. If I can share screens here. But here in Korea, I can get traditional silk that's still woven and dyed in the basically the medieval technique. So the silk here is 18 inches wide. It's medieval width fabric, which forces you automatically to apply medieval patterning and structuring layout techniques. And also it's expensive because even though it might only be $10 a yard, when your fabric is only 18 inches wide, $10 a yard to get an actual normal amount of fabric. It makes the price significantly higher for the amount of fabric you would need. Okay, any last questions? I was planning to do this for an hour and we're 4 minutes out. So one last question. Can you see if I missed any questions? Simple and like it down in Abbey. Yeah. I always feel so sorry for Carson and Downton Abbey. He just think the times keep changing and they're not changing in a way that he likes. Period technique for, well, okay, so actually, yes, I feel like the traditional pottery techniques actually should be preserved. And by traditional pottery techniques, I mean the massive furnace that you have to tend for 48 to 72 hours. And, you have to keep the fire going. And this is actually, there's still a couple of potters, not many. There's a couple of potters left in Korea who are still doing this, and they still wear the traditional 19th century potters clothing. And that's dying out because apparently, according to what I've been told by one of these master potters, the younger generations aren't interested in, doing rotating shifts over a period of 3 days to keep the furnace going. So I feel like that should be preserved. Thankfully, the Korean government is actually taking serious steps to preserve its cultural heritage. And so they have artisans in Korea who are declared as national treasures. Not the art, but the artisan is declared as a national treasure. And I don't know this, but I would assume maybe they get some kind of financial support from the government to actually continue doing their art and maybe to train other people to do their art. I feel like there might be a resurgence of interest amongst younger Koreans in their traditional crafts. For a long time, obviously, it was all about Western and modern and bigger and better. But now that Korean culture is actually becoming popular worldwide, I think maybe people in my generation and younger are looking back at their own heritage and finding value in that. And so I'm hoping that, the traditional pottery techniques will be preserved, but also the fermenting, right? The traditional making of the gochujang, the red pepper paste, and the doenjang, the brown fermented soybean paste. And they have a couple of other fermented sauces, and of course kimchi, all the different kinds of kimchi. You know, those products are slow food. They take a long time, and again, it takes patience, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of hand grinding if you want to get the flavors actually right. So I'm really hoping there will be a resurgence of interest amongst Koreans to preserve their fermented product heritage and the actual process of making it in the traditional way. That's a really good question. And the thing about there's some people in Korea who like to claim that gochu, the red pepper, has been here in Korea for thousands of years. That's simply not true. So pre 17th century Korean food actually completely lacks the red peppers. I've been trying to explore to find sources on recipes for pre 1600, pre Columbian exchange Korean food. I haven't tried in 2 years, and a lot more resources have been made available in English, so I'm going to try that again. But yeah, I really feel that a lot of the traditional Korean food techniques and craft techniques are absolutely worth preserving. Especially as we all try to slow down and live a little more mindfully in this chaotically fast modern world in which we live. That's a really good question, and really does tie into my whole approach to life and creativity. Okay, well, everyone, I want to thank you so much for joining me for my first Creative Contessa live Q&A, and I'm going to be doing this once a month. And I will be doing a separate one on my travel channel that's going to focus specifically on travel. I'm trying not to pollute my creativity channel too much with travel content. I'm trying to keep them separated, as it were. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate your support. You guys are such good friends. And I look forward to seeing you all at the next one. Have a great rest of your weekend in whatever hemisphere or time zone you're in. And, stay creative. Bye, guys.